Hi, hello, Anthony.
Hello, how are you?
Good. I'm very happy that you found time from your very busy schedule to
Oh
have
yeah,
a
you're
chat
very
with me.
welcome.
Yeah, because I
Yeah, it
saw that you
happens.
were in some conference just recently.
Yeah, I've been at a couple conferences and now I'm just back in America. Yeah.
Okay. So for introduction, I say that for my non-duality viewers, that when non-duality killed me, killed the sense of self or separation, then carnivore saved me, saved the health, this body when the body was collapsing and was ready to die. But then we found this carnivore diet. Very
Yeah,
thankful.
wow.
But yeah,
Oh, I'm
so
really glad to hear that.
yeah, me too. We had tried everything and for years with my partner, and this was what helped.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad that it helped.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, amazing. So probably most of my viewers who are interested about non-duality don't know you, although in carnivore community there is nobody who doesn't know Anthony Chaffee. So maybe talk shortly. Who are you? What is your profession? How it started? How you started with this carnivore diet? How long you have been in this journey?
Yeah, well, I started with sorry, my mic seems to be sort of switching on and off.
Hmm. But
Can
I
you
can
hear me
hear you.
okay?
Yeah, very well.
Mhm. Okay, I don't know what's going on.
Now I don't hear you.
All right, what about now?
Now it's good.
Okay, all right. Hopefully that stays. So I've been doing carnivore. Well, I started carnivore 20 something years ago, probably around 24 years ago. 25 years ago now. Oh God, that's a long time ago. And um it was just by default. I was an athlete, I was in university, and I always wanted to eat right and give my body the right fuel. I was always interested in medicine. And I understood that food was medicine and you needed to eat right in order to be as healthy as you could. And then medicine would help fill in the gaps and all that sort of stuff. So I always sort of thought that way. And my parents raised us to be really conscious about the food that we eat and how important it was to eat appropriately. And these different things would cause harm, but it was all the wrong things, right? It was like fat caused heart disease. It blocked up your arteries and all that sort of stuff. And we always ate meat, but it was always like lean meats and things like that, and always trimmed off all the fat and skim milk, and we had shredded freaking wheat. Loathe shredded wheat, and it's just so disgusting. But that was supposed to be the healthiest. Never really had sugar cereals, maybe a couple times a year as a treat. That was it. Never had any junk food, and so eating as cleanly as we knew how, and taking nutrition classes and just doing everything that you were supposed to do. And I was very healthy and I worked really hard as an athlete. I trained all the time and I was in very good shape. I was an all-American rugby player, played in university, played at a premiership level as a late teenager and in university as well as on the university team. And so things were good, but um, then I took a class in cancer biology, and this was sort of later in my academic career in my undergrad. So I'd already had biology, botany, organic chemistry, genetics, all these other sorts of things. So I had a good background, and I took this cancer biology class, and the professor started talking about how toxic plants were. And I understood that from botany because that's just how plants defend themselves. They have no way to run away or fight back. And so they use chemical defenses. So I understood that. And most plants are toxic. They'll kill you if you eat them. Some, if you just get too close to them, they exude chemicals that can actually harm you or even kill you. There's a garden in England. It's like the most like the deadliest garden or something like that, and it has a sign on the gate that says these plants can kill. And And some people, like the groundskeepers, have actually died from getting in too close of a contact with some of these plants and have actually died. And so I knew about that concept, but then he was giving it, he was talking about plants that we were eating, like fruits and vegetables and produce items and grains and things like that, and how they had toxins too, and how they had carcinogens, and like some of these toxins were carcinogenic. And this is something that the WHO recognizes. It's on their website. They talk about how these different plant toxins and chemicals or toxins found in mushrooms can be mutagenic or carcinogenic to both livestock and humans and have caused serious harm and in the past. And so that was very shocking for us. And we were very taken aback by that, about how many toxins and carcinogens were in the plants. Like they said 136 carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts, over 100 in mushrooms. But all the produce items that you ever eat, fruits, vegetables, grains, everything, they all had dozens and dozens and dozens of carcinogens. And they were quite abundant. We knew from research back in the 1980s, early 90s from Professor Bruce Ames and others that the naturally occurring toxins outweighed the pesticides that we were spraying on them by a factor of 10,000. And people say, well, we're breeding plants to be less and less toxic. No, we're not. We're actually breeding them to be more toxic because if they're more toxic, then you use less pesticides. You use less chemicals and it's cheaper and you get a higher crop yield and you can grow this in all sorts of different areas. And that's where GMOs come in too. We're not only breeding them to be more toxic, we're genetically engineering them to be more toxic because they'll splice a protein or a gene from one plant that's resistant to, whatever sort of insect they're worried about, and they'll take that protein that makes them resistant. And they'll use those words resistant. It means poisonous. They're poisonous to that insect or that animal, which is what makes them resistant to it because the animal can't eat it, but eat it, they'll die. And so you take that gene that codes for that protein, you put this in this other crop that is susceptible to these insects, meaning they get eaten by it. And now they're resistant to it, meaning they're poisonous to it, so they don't get eaten by it. So that means it's an internal pesticide. And so what do people think that means? That means it's poison. That's a toxin. And so these things are designed to kill insects. They're designed to kill animals that are trying to eat the crops. What do we think they're gonna do to us? Just nothing. We're just outside of nature. Just because we live in houses? No, I'm sorry. Like our biology is pretty similar to a lot of other animals, and we need to understand that the same physical laws that apply to all life on Earth applies to us as well. And so some things are better or worse, but we are making these things more toxic. And so we were very blown away by this. And he just impressed upon us that he didn't eat vegetables and wouldn't let his kids eat vegetables because in his words, plants are trying to kill you. So why would you just walk into that? It's your choice if you eat plants or not, and if you eat something poisonous or not. So you don't have to do it unless you're starving. And so that was the start of it. I just stopped eating plants all entirely. I just defaulted into just eating eggs and meat because what else are you supposed to eat? And even though I was already feeling really good and performing at a high level, it just went into the stratosphere. Like my performance, athleticism, my health just went to completely new levels. It was absolutely insane how much energy I had, how much my fitness level just started just multiplying faster and faster and faster. And it was pretty amazing. And I did that for about 5 years, and then I was in England playing rugby, and I sort of slipped off of it. And I remember not really realizing I was slipping off of it because some of the meat was breaded. So I was like, oh, well, maybe it's not that big of a deal. As they say, dose makes the poison. And yeah, dose does make the poison. The dose is that small. It's really small. It doesn't take much to really screw up your system. And I didn't realize that. I didn't chalk that up to why I didn't feel nearly as good. And I just thought it was age. I was 25. I guess I was just falling apart and dying now. But at 25, I felt like a superhero, and 25 and a half, I didn't. And I couldn't explain why. And it was within a couple months that changed. And so I tried to I tried to just, keep going with it. But I never felt the same. I could never get back to how good I felt at that time until I was 38. So it was another 13 years on. And I'd been playing rugby, for another decade after that, like, through medical school and beyond. And, um, and now I've been a doctor for 5 years at that point. Just got back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. And, and then all of a sudden I came back to this and I found, came across the evidence. It was like, no, actually humans really are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal we are. And that's what I was doing for 5 years. I was eating to our biological design, and I've never felt better in my entire life. And I was like, well, that makes sense because if you feed animals in the zoo or in captivity something they're not designed to eat, they'll get sick and they get the exact same illnesses that we get. I mean, there's signs at parks. I've seen them. It says don't feed ducks. It gives them diabetes, right? Okay. So don't feed the ducks bread, I should say. Don't feed ducks bread because it gives them diabetes. What the hell is it doing to us? you know? And so, or signs of the zoo, they don't feed the animals, it makes them very sick to eat, what they're not designed to eat. We're animals too. And we need to understand that, whether we're divine here, sent from heaven or whatever, or just through nature, the biological laws apply. We still are beholden to these physical laws. And we did not come here from a space. We are not made out of ether and ambrosia. Like we are biological creatures, and we have certain inputs that we need, and certain ones that are deleterious to our health. And we ignore that at our own risk. And so then I started really looking into this, and from that standpoint of a doctor, say, okay, we are carnivores, but we're not eating as carnivores. And I've come to realize that that's the major cause of this uptick in chronic disease, that we are not giving ourselves the biological inputs that we should be. And it's not just food. There's other things as well, but food is a major, major one because we're getting these inputs every single day. And so I find that when I just change those inputs and people just start eating properly, it massively improves their health. I mean, just absolutely astounding recoveries, some people are having, to the point that people are like, well, that's just like, that must be snake oil and things like that. It's like, but like more of these things are getting published. And, we're getting ready to publish a paper on people who have recovered from multiple sclerosis. And, it's a case series, it's not a prospective study. So take that for what it is, but it does show and highlight about a dozen people, and we could have done it with 50 or 100. We just have to keep it you have to keep it within reason, for our own sake, and also just people get bored after a while reading all these things. um, that I mean, some of these people had absolutely miraculous recoveries. I mean, some of them were bedridden, couldn't move, they're crippled, and now they're living completely normal lives or in real wheelchairs. Some are still in wheelchairs and having difficulty, but they are improving and they're recovering. And sometimes they're on their MRI, their lesions are reducing and shrinking down. Going from a 5 centimeter lesion in one gentleman's brain stem to now it's an eighth of an inch, and it's just like a bit of scar tissue, and he's completely recovered symptomatically. So these are amazing, amazing recoveries, and so it's something that I've been incorporating in my practice now. So it's been since I went back onto carnivore, it's been about 7 years now. So 5 years in my early 20s, and another 7 years now.
Mm.
Sorry, that was a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah.
Very good. My last questions was about, our next question was about plant toxins that we were
Mhm.
also talking with Phil Scott. Who haven't
Mhm.
watched this video, go check it out. And also, Phil mentioned your video about plants are trying to kill you or something
Mhm.
like that. So
Mhm.
guys, go and check this also out. Yeah, and let's talk about health. But before that, let's talk a little bit about grains, because here it was when I cut out grains, then all inflammation, years lasting pain in my joints were gone
Mhm.
with 24 hours. It was
Oh,
amazing.
wow.
So I started slowly with this carnivore stuff, like low carb, then keto, and it was like 2.5 weeks when I was fully carnivore. and since then, like 7 months. So it showed like so quickly here that it is good for the health, and whatever I was eating before, although it was full food, organic, 30 different plants, everything healthy, as we have taught or learned, and our health went worse and worse and worse to the point when I literally was here in my couch and I thought that yeah, there is no tomorrow, and that's okay. Then it's enough with this suffering, because although I was then 10 kilo bigger, but the body was so malnourished,
Malnourished.
malnourished. Yes, sorry,
Mhm.
my English. So when I started to eat like this, it was like, oh my God, my body was dancing. Although I didn't like the meat, but the body somehow was like getting excited when the finally food that your body can digest started to come in. And even when I was in Spain, I was counting the calories just to check. I didn't know how much the meat gives the calories and what is the macros. And it was like 4,000 calories. And I was
Yeah,
still
right.
losing weight. and
Mm.
and before I was eating like 2,000, 2,500, but it was mostly like carbs. And I was fluffy. I was heavy. I was exhausted. I had chronic fatigue and
Mhm.
SIBO and IBS and leaky gut and reflux and painful inflammation in my chest and lots of stuff going on, and
Mm.
everything vanished. And since then I have no symptoms. I'm symptom free. So we have heard that no grains, no pain about a couple of years, but it didn't click. And then when I cut them out, we understand that okay, because I also have a celiac gene, and so I was eating no gluten, and I was able to eat oats for a while, but then the body couldn't digest. It started to spin in my stomach. I started to feel sick. Then I was eating amaranth, um, millet, buckwheat, rice, everything. I tried different, and I could eat everything for a while, and then couldn't anymore. And they were organic, but I think that not only gluten is the problem, but all these poisons, glyphosates and stuff they are using for this, and this causes the leaky gut. Tell me about grains.
Well, yeah, grain. So remember that a grain is a seed, right? So we're taking that the seed part of the plant, and we can make more plants with that, grow more seeds, but also we're eating them, right? So there are a lot of nutrients that are in grains. There's a lot of nutrients that are going to be in plants. Not all of them are going to be bioavailable, but obviously these are living things, and there are things that are in there that are good for living things, and so that's how. Um, that's how we get nutrition, or we're heterotrophs. We have to eat something living in order that we may get the nutrients that we need. We can't pull it out of thin air like plants can. And for the most part, we get some things from inorganic sort of inputs as well. But the majority of the actual vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, all that stuff that comes from our food, and that comes from eating things that are alive, or were once alive. So that's what a heterotroph is. You have to eat something else that's alive in order for you to continue to live. And it's not necessarily nice that that is the case, but it is the case, and that's just the reality. And if if we deny reality, we're the ones that are going to lose with that. Grains are a seed. A seed is a plant's baby. Everything protects its babies more than anything. And so seeds typically have the highest concentration of these defensive chemicals, because they really don't want the babies being eaten, because then that's the whole point of life. The biological meaning of life is procreation, is making more generations and more generations. and perpetuating your species and your genetics. That's the entire point biologically. And so that's what plants are trying to do. And so if their seed is more vulnerable, then they're not going to be able to pass on their genetics and have more generations. So the seeds are typically the highest toxin, right? And like like apple seeds are pretty high in cyanide. You wouldn't eat those things. And yet people make smoothies and they just cut apples and they don't take out the seeds. They don't even think about that. And they've actually done studies where they look at smoothies and like stores and things like that, shops that make smoothies with where they don't take the seeds out of the apples. They actually have a decent amount of cyanide in it, and there's no safe level of cyanide. It's not like, well, dose makes the point. Yeah, 0 is the safe dose of cyanide, and so it can cause harm long before it's fatal. You get thyroid dysfunction, neurological dysfunction, multi-organ function. It damages all your mitochondria. It stops the electron transport chain in your mitochondria, so you can't generate energy, ATP, properly. So this is a feature of all seeds, and grains are seeds, and so they will often have very, very highly toxic things in them. And we eat these things, but it used to be that we ate refined grains. We would actually take off the husk and not eat brown rice. It would be like milled like white rice, things like that. And like stone grinding seemed to make a bit of a difference too. And then over the years, we stopped using um, heritage breeds of grains. We started making these things more and more toxic, using more and more chemicals, genetically splicing in more and more genetics and genes and proteins that would make it resistant to more things, make it more toxic. And so these things have gotten worse and worse. And also we're spraying horrific chemicals on them as well. And so, I've and the fruits as well. I mean, I was speaking to someone the other day, and he's originally, if you may know Eddie Abu, he's he has a big social media channel talking about just eating real food, and don't be an idiot and eating this garbage, right? And so it's great. And he's originally from Ghana, and when he's in America and he's eating avocados, like he would just get real sick and he just couldn't do it. And he was getting his mouth was getting all like itchy and get like a rash in his mouth and on his lips. Like, what the hell is that? He'd go back to England and it wouldn't be as bad, but he'd still sort of get it. So he had this like allergy thing to avocados. Not in Ghana. He didn't have any problem in Ghana. Same fruit, just grown under different circumstances and actually ripened on the tree. It's only seasonal. It's only available for a couple of weeks out of the year. It's not like picked green. It has a lot more toxins when it's green and then shipped over. And then box ripened, all these pesticides, all that sort of stuff. So grains are a problem, a twofold problem. One, they're one of the more toxic parts of the plant. And two, how we raise them are even more toxic. We're spraying Roundup on these things, which is glyphosate, which is horribly toxic. They said that it was safe, but these were studies that came from their own studies. The producers made these studies, and they've been shown to not be accurate. They couldn't be reproduced in the way that they had. Then when people did reproduce them, they got very different results, and showed that these were very harmful and toxic, causing tumors and cancers and other sort of multi-organ failure in the mice that were exposed to it. And so this stuff is very harmful. And in fact, when we say dose makes the poison, not always. With glyphosate, it's actually been shown that the lower the dose of glyphosate, the higher the hormonal impact. It's called an endocrine disruptor. It disrupts your hormones and how they function. And the less glyphosate you get exposed to, the worse your hormonal damage, which is interesting. But so it's not dose makes a poison. Sometimes just anything is actually a very small amount is going to be worse. And now we're using so much glyphosate, about 4.5 billion gallons of glyphosate a year. 99.9% of that never touches a weed or anything like that. It all washes off in the rainwater and gets into the gets into the water supply, gets into the groundwater, gets into the rivers, kills untold amount of life. It's an antibiotic. It's um, it's an herbicide. It kills all sorts of different plants, kills all the bacteria in the soil and in the water, and damages, all sorts of different, animal life as well. And we're using it in such abundance that it's now being found in the rainwater in certain areas. And so you have rainwater, oh, but it's only such a small amount. Yeah. And a smaller amount makes a worse endocrine disruption problem. So grains are one of the worst things that you can eat for so many different reasons because the most toxic. They're typically grown with Roundup, at least certain ones are, and they have a lot of carbohydrates, which will kick you out of your natural ketogenic metabolism. Your most of your tissue, nearly all of your tissue, will only run on ketones if there are ketones available, even if there's an abundance of glucose. People say, well, when you're fasting and you're starving, then your body switches to ketosis as a backup, but that doesn't actually make sense because when we are fasting, we haven't eaten for a few days and we start making ketones, we still make glucose. We actually have perfect glucose levels. We'll stay between, it'll be like, between 80 and 90, 80 and 100, um, or in sort of European, Australian numbers between 4 and 5. So you'll have perfect blood sugar levels, even though you're not eating carbohydrates, but you will have ketones. And now the majority of your body, including the majority of your brain, your heart, your intestines, your other organs, and your muscles, will exclusively or nearly exclusively run on ketones. Some will still run on a bit of carbohydrates, and you can use it as a bit of a backup. But that's the thing: the glucose is the backup supply, not the ketones, because when you have ketones and you have glucose, 2/3 of your brain will only run on ketones. Your heart will only run on ketones. Your intestines will only run on ketones by and large, and same with your muscles as well. It's only when you get above 90% VO2 max that you start switching over to glucose for your muscles, and people don't realize that. So the vast majority of the energy you use are ketones, and so when you're eating grains as well, it switches your body to this glucose, you usually say, which is our backup fuel source. And that actually, because insulin goes up, that suppresses our ability to run on our fat. So we don't get to burn fat. If your insulin is high, you cannot burn fat. It's not possible. And and you can't make ketones, which are just fat energy. And so that's a downside as well. You're harming yourself in those ways as well. And so grains, I think, are probably the first thing people should get rid of.
Mm. Yeah, and seed oils.
And well, yeah, and those come from grains,
Yeah.
right? And that's another thing too, is that these grains are high in fats, but they're the wrong kinds of fats. Some of them are fine, some of them aren't. Very high in linoleic acid. And so you even see this in animals that are grain fed,
Mm-hmm.
like pigs and chicken, that their fat is going to have a much higher proportion of linoleic acid, which is actually not good for us, especially past a certain point. We can deal with a small amount of it, but we're not getting small amounts of it now. We're getting very large amounts of it, and ruminant animals seem to be better at that, at fermenting and breaking down these things, and not getting so much of the linoleic acid in their system. But pigs and chicken and even fish that are farmed, they don't have a fermentative capacity, and so they're monogastrics like us. They just absorb it into their body, which is not great, when you're talking about plants with plant toxins and seed oils and things like that. So yeah, so that can be a problem too, is the seed oils. Now we're refining seed oils, and we're taking them out, extracting them, putting in like hexane and bleach and all these other sort of horrific, additives, and maybe they come out completely and maybe they don't. They usually don't. When you're talking about these sorts of things, there's almost always at least a trace left behind. Hexane's a known carcinogen, and so something that was only invented. It was actually a machine oil lubricant back in the 1800s, cottonseed oil, and they started making other plant oils, and they were cheaper, so they started using these for machinery. And then Procter and Gamble had the bright idea to start feeding it to people in 1911, and started giving it to people, putting it in the fruit supply in the form of Crisco, which is hydrogenated seed oils. Those, these are trans fats, the partially hydrogenated seed oils. These are trans fats, and those have been shown to cause huge amounts of harm. I mean, we were hearing about this in the 90s, how bad they were, and they're sort of banning them from, McDonald's all throughout the 80s and most of the 90s, I believe. They switched from beef tallow to frying it in seed oils, trans fats specifically, and so that was horrible. And so that would have increased the toxic burden a lot. I mean, my organic chemistry professor, he taught us is like, that the trans fats means that they have this double bond. You have a trans bond, so that the continuation of the molecule goes on the opposite side of that double bond instead of on the same side, where they kind of go up and then down. So it forms. So you're going to have the exact same chemical structure, like on paper, but the physical structure is very different. This bond will go up and then down, and the shape is really important with molecules. And so with trans, it goes up and then continues going up, and that's a completely different shape. There's only cis bonds in nature. Trans bonds don't exist in nature, in chemistry for these fats. And so, through this industrial process, we've made these trans bonds instead of the cis bonds, and our bodies have no idea what to do with that, and they can't use that, and so they just end up getting deposited all over, like in our arteries and things like that, cause these huge blockages, and people just having heart attacks, presumably as a result of that. And so, I heard about that, in the 90s as a kid, and then taking organic chemistry in 2000. That was relayed to us as well, and we saw why chemically, my organic chemistry class. And then I just looked it up. Actually, they actually didn't even get banned until like 2020 or something like that. I mean, it's wild. We've had decades of evidence that this stuff is toxic, and it's only just now getting taken out completely. I mean, there's other places that have stopped using it anyway, but actually getting banned. So yeah, no, that stuff is absolute poison and doesn't belong in our bodies. I mean, you say what you want about what we're designed to eat, and what our biology actually dictates, and going back, and what's healthy for us. Healthy is for us when there's an immutable law of nature, and is that of adaptation. It's the largest randomized controlled trial that has ever existed, is life, and generational life and evolution. That if certain ways were better, they would have won out. And so people that ate more meat and did well, like through the ice ages and things like that, they're the ones that survived. The Homo habilis, they went full carnivore, they went apex predator. There were other people around at the time, early proto-humans, and that ate more plants. They all died out. They all did not make it. So that's the largest randomized controlled trial that's gone on for the longest. It's been going on for 2 million years now, and on the largest scale. And that's the best piece of evidence. What are we most adapted to? What have we been doing for the longest? What has given us the most success? And that's eating meat. And since the agricultural revolution, we've become shorter, our brains have become smaller, our teeth are crooked, and we're getting health issues, we're getting chronic diseases that never existed before that. And now we're ramping it up even more because we're eating this processed garbage with artificial ingredients that have never existed in nature, that don't exist in nature, that can't exist in nature, like the trans fats. And this is causing an even higher increase in this burden of chronic diseases, and new, exciting, weird, wonderful, horrible chronic diseases. And it's affecting people in younger and younger and younger generations. People say, well, no, meat's doing it. And well, what about all these hunter-gatherer populations, really just hunter populations, or pastoral populations like the Maasai and the Nanette, or the just straight up hunter populations like the Inuit? There's nothing to grow. There's nothing to gather in the North Pole. There's just meat, and they don't get any of these things. Well, but they die really young. No, they don't. No, they actually live to be over 90, over 100 if they die of old age. It's just that infant mortality is high when you're dealing with lions and polar bears and things like that, and negative 50-degree weather in summer. You know, maybe not that bad, but very harsh conditions. You know, people don't necessarily make it, but when they die of old age, they're dying in their 90s or over 100. By their records, and they none of them are getting these chronic diseases. None of them, unless they start eating Western food, which should tell you everything that you need to know. It's only when they start eating Western food that they start getting Western diseases. And this is something that's well described in anthropology, where they say that these native populations don't get any of these problems. The problems they get are accidents, injuries, difficulty in childbirth, and infectious disease. That's what they die from if they die young, right? And then it's when they live as long or longer when you don't average life, if you don't average in infant mortality, because obviously they're going to have a much higher infant mortality rate. And so they're living plenty long to get diabetes. I mean, 10-year-olds are getting type 2 diabetes now, younger than that are now. There's studies with Professor Robert Lustig. I mean, they were looking at kids. Some of these kids were under 10 years old, and they had fatty liver disease and metabolic syndrome, and some had diabetes. So, you're telling me that the Inuit don't live past 10? Like, really? Like, okay, well, then we should be seeing this. If it's meat, only meat causing these diseases, then obviously, I mean, they should be the hardest hit by this. All these populations should be the hardest hit by this. And they're not. And it's just a complete falsity. But, what we've been doing for the longest period of time is what we should be doing. We've only been eating plants in any large number for 10,000 years. We know this. Well, we were eating tubers and this is that. No, we weren't, because we did not have the genetic capacity to digest plant starches until about 10,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture. People say, well, if we're carnivores, then why do we make amylase, which breaks down starches? Okay, when did we start making amylase? That's the key question, right? And it was about 10,000 years ago. We were not that was not in the genetic in our genetics prior to 10,000 years ago. That's when we started seeing it, and then it really started exploding, and it grew really fast with the advent of more agriculture, right? Because those are the people that survive. Okay, we're eating a whole bunch of grains, and you can't get any like nutrients from it. You're just getting sort of crap, and like those people didn't make it, right? So the people that were able to start making amylase, those were the people that survived because it radically changed our food supply. But that didn't make us not benefit from eating meat. That was survival food. They couldn't get enough meat, and the ones that were able to survive on this alternative food, those are the ones who made it. And that's why amylase exploded the way it did 10,000 years ago, not 50,000 years ago, not 100,000 years ago, and certainly not longer than that. Homo sapiens have been around for oldest estimates around 300,000 years. And it's only been 10,000 years that we've been making amylase. So no. And then what about prior to that with the earlier humans that evolved into Homo sapiens, right? They definitely weren't eating tubers and roots and things like that because they were not making amylase. So we added these things back in 10,000 years ago. We had a dramatic drop in our height and our brain capacity and our health. We can see this clearly in the fossil record and the dental record. And that's continued and perpetuated. And now it's gotten even worse because we have maybe some populations have about 10,000 years of exposure to plants. But then, like the native Australian Aboriginals, the Native Americans, and Mesoamerica, they had agriculture. But much of the rest of North and South America did not up until much more recently. And the Inuit, the Maasai, other African sort of nations, the Mongols. I mean, they're still carnivores, and for the most part, and at least with Genghis Khan, and then they started transitioning when they sort of took over China and started taking more of that sort of cuisine in, but still very heavily meat eating. And so the genetic capacity is not as great for certain populations as others, but no one has a genetic capacity for seed oils and these artificial ingredients and the trans fats and all these other things that only got introduced to the food supply 100 years ago or so. No one has a genetic capacity for that. And so that is causing even more harm. And since the 1970s, this is a statistic I heard probably 20 years ago when I was in college, is that since the 19, so it's probably more now. So since the 1970s, we have patented over 1 million different chemicals that have never existed in nature. These are completely man-made. And the majority of them are in food, in beauty, care, makeup, that sort of thing, and agrochemical industry. So you got 1 million different chemicals that have never existed in nature, and we're now being heavily exposed to every day, either through our food, through our skin, or through the agrochemical putting it on the food. So this is going to be a major contributor to the chronic diseases because we have absolutely no capacity to deal with these novel chemicals that don't exist in nature.
You shared so much interesting information. You covered so many topics. I have so many questions that I want to add. And just a comment before carnivore, when I was eating, I could eat like 800 grams of porridge and I felt empty inside, like hungry,
Mm,
like crazy. I understand that
yeah.
stomach was full, but I felt hungry. Like this is not a food. I don't know.
Mm,
Now
yeah.
it's so satiating what I'm eating. And also you mentioned this evolution. Often when people hear that I started with carnivore or they hear about this, they start to worry that, or vegans say that, but there are no long-term studies about carnivore. But is there
Two
any
million years,
long-term?
as long as you get it. Yeah.
It's the longest, it's the proper human diet. It's how the
Mhm.
humans have evolved. And I think that there are no long-term studies about vegan or is
No.
yeah, I think
So, and
it's detrimental.
yeah.
It's bad for your health in long term. You can't do this.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's no robust studies on veganism either. It's just survey studies. So, oh well, when people eat more vegetables, they seem to do better. And your doctored, crazy sort of survey that you manipulated the data. This is what they do, and survey studies are rife for interpretive errors, either malicious or accidental. And so yeah, there's no long-term studies on veganism, and there are no vegan tribes. There's never been a vegan tribe ever, and not one that lived anyway. All the more herbivorous early humans around 2 million years ago, when the ice ages hit, they all died. So that's veganism, and they were much more adapted to eating plants then than we are now. Much more adapted to that. For the last 2 million years, we've largely, if not in certain areas and times, exclusively eaten meat. I mean, we know that humans have been thriving in the Arctic Circle during the ice ages. Nothing else grows during the ice, in the Arctic Circle, especially during an ice age. And so, we know that people crossed a land bridge that was uncovered from Asia to North America, walked over it by foot, um, because the sea levels were so far down because of all the ice and all the death that came from that. What is growing exactly, in those conditions? It's like it's nothing. You have to hunt, you have to fish. You're getting seals going in the water, eating fish coming out, and then you're eating those or some other sorts of animals, or the polar bears or giant cave bears and things like that. Eating those things, then you might be hunting them. Um, and getting into other sort of areas, mammoths. We were major mammoth hunters all across the world. So that is the study. And when you look at, a more vegetarian population like the Akikuyu in Africa and the Maasai in Africa, living at the same time in the same area in the same environment, just out in nature, um, the Maasai are largely carnivorous, certainly historically. And this study was done in the 1920s when they were still predominantly eating their natural diet, although they had started to include a little bit of millet seeds in their diet, but not much. But that was shown, that was discussed in the paper, saying this is new. This is a new addition. They don't normally do this, and they found that the Akikuyu, who were genetically similar because they've been interbreeding long before the Europeans got there, um, that they were largely vegetarian, ate a lot of millet seed and other seeds. The men ate a lot of grains. The women ate grains, but also a more diverse, leafy sort of plant sort of diet. And the Akikuyu were far less healthy than the Maasai. And the Akikuyu men were far less healthy than the Akikuyu women, who had a bit more of a diverse vegetarian diet. Than the Maasai women were far and away healthier than all of the Akikuyu. And the Maasai men, who ate more of the blood and the meat, because the women had more of the women and children had more of the milk, but the men were the fighters and the warriors who had to, fight off, other tribes or lions who were trying to get at their herds. They had more of the blood and the meat, so they could be stronger because they understood that that's how you got more healthy and strong. They were by far the healthiest, by far the healthiest. And I've heard some vegans online try to misrepresent that and say that the Akikuyu women were the most healthy. That is an abject lie. That is just a bald-faced lie. You look at this study and you see that they were actually better than the Akikuyu men, but far worse than the Maasai women, and the Maasai men were healthier than that. So the Maasai men were 5 inches taller than the Akikuyu men, were 23 pounds heavier of lean body mass, and 50% stronger. And they also had none of the chronic disease issues, the diabetes and the other sorts of chronic issues, infectious disease. Akikuyu were far more likely to get infectious disease issues, and and the disparity between the Maasai women and the Akikuyu women was apparently even greater than that. It was more as a percentile sort of thing. It was much greater. And remember, they intermarried, so they're genetically similar. So it's not just like, well, yeah, but they're just short people. Comparing like the Nordic people with like dudes from Sri Lanka or something like that. I mean, there's just going to be a height disparity. So maybe diet related, but there may be other sort of, genetic, epigenetic sort of factors as well. But no, they've been interbreeding as long as we know, because for as long as Europeans have been in that area to record this, they've been interbreeding. So at least hundreds of years, if not, thousands and thousands and thousands. But those disparities, those differences between the Maasai and the Akikuyu, the height, health, brain size, teeth, all that sort of stuff, those are the exact same differences that we saw in the fossil record before and after agriculture 10,000 years ago in other parts of the world. And it wasn't like the entire world just dropped down. It was only in those areas that had agriculture. I mean, this is black and white. People say like, well, the cranial capacity, brain size has dropped down in the last 10,000 years. Like, I've heard vegans admit that. Oh, but we don't know why. Maybe it's just our brains are getting more advanced. It's like, you have to be a special kind of stupid, or just trying to fool other people if you try to spout that nonsense. This happened only in areas that adopted agriculture, and only when they adopted agriculture. The rest of the fossil record stayed the same. And then another population adopted agriculture, bam, height and health and brain size went down. And we saw this in real time with the Native Americans and Australian Aboriginals in the last century and a half. Exactly the same thing happened. Bam, drop in height, drop in brain size, teeth got smaller, or jaws got smaller, teeth got crooked. This was recorded in real time at that transition inflection point by Weston A. Price, Dr. Price, who was a dentist, and he started looking at this from teeth and had these people like perfectly developed jaws and teeth and all that sort of stuff. And you read all these, um, you know, stories about the chronicles of people meeting the native populations that had dark skin and bright white teeth, just perfect glowing white teeth. Europeans didn't have glowing white teeth. People that had agriculture had horrible teeth. Well, that should tell you something. If you're eating a food that rots your teeth, you're not eating the right thing, because in nature you don't have dentists, you don't have toothbrush, you don't have toothpaste and floss and all that, and mouthwash and things like that. You can't disinfect your mouth every day with Listerine. You have to have the right bacteria, and the right bacteria are going to come from the right food. And so if you're getting the wrong bacteria, that means you're eating the wrong food. Because if you lose your teeth in the wild, you don't eat anymore and you die. One way or the other, you're going to die. That comes to the end of your life. You lose your teeth, you lose your life. That's it. The Eskimos, the Inuit, they have a tradition where they'll actually like chew on leather. They'll chew on leather and they'll sort of help cure it. And and a lot of turn it into leather. They'll wear it. They use it as in housing and blankets and all that sort of stuff. All these hides, and they can't chew their leather because their teeth have worn away. Because we're not rodents, and they sort of just wear away, wear away, wear away. So we're not really designed to do that with our teeth. If they can't even do that, if you're sort of elderly to the point and that your teeth have worn away as well, they're like, these are harsh environments. This is rough. And so what they do is they actually go out and just expose themselves out and they say, hey, okay, it's time for me to go, and they're healthy. They're able to make that conscious choice. It's not like they're being thrown out into the wild to die, someone, like instead of going to like a nursing home or something like that. They're just like, I can't provide any, benefit. I'm not pulling my weight. So that's it. Also, you can't really eat, because your teeth are so worn out. And you can't eat, you can't help. They got to go because they're just going to be dead weight for the family. And they just go out. So they're not even dying of old age. They're going like they're euthanizing themselves because their teeth wear out. So your teeth go, you go. And so if your teeth are rotting out by the time you're 24, that's it. You're done. And so Dr. Price saw this, and he saw that people that were eating a more traditional diet, getting a lot of animal fat. Specifically, he was talking about animal fat because of those fat soluble nutrients and vitamins he felt were very important for the proper development of teeth and jaw. And he was right. And that's in current modern dentistry journals. I found papers on that in the last decade or so, detailing how there were certain like vitamin K2, K1, D3, calcium, those sorts of things were very important for proper facial development and jaw development. And K2 and D3 only come from animal fat, only come from animal fat. And typically that's what people are low on, especially K2. You can get a bit of vitamin D from the sun unless you live in the northern latitudes and no one goes outside anyway. And that's a whole other thing. We need exposure to light because we are terrestrial creatures. Light is extremely important. That is part of the inputs that we need. And vitamin D isn't the half of it on what we get from that. But people need these nutrients, and they're typically fat soluble, animal fat soluble nutrients that only exist in animal fats. They don't exist in the plant or fungus kingdoms. And so things like D3, K2, that's very important for jaw development. So we saw this in real time, and it's well documented. There's a study in 2001 called Tallest in the World that looked at the Native Americans in the late 1800s in the Great Plains. So looking at the Cheyenne and other tribes in that area who had traditionally eaten predominantly, if not exclusively, a carnivorous diet because of the bison, the buffaloes, because they had over 100 million buffalo cruising through the Great Plains of America, which made the Great Plains such a fertile and vibrant place and was able to support so much life because plants and animals support each other in nature when things are done right. And so then the American military, they wanted to have this Western expansion, or the Western, American government and the military had this Western expansion. And so the idea was to knock out their food supply and wipe out all the buffalo and bison. And, they killed, like over 100 million bison. I think it was down to like 50 or something like that. They nearly went extinct. and they've really been struggling to bring back those populations. But they did that in order to cut off the food supply to the Native Americans. So that tells you something about their food supply, right? And in the late 1800s, the Cheyenne, who again were, you know, of those people that would eat a lot of buffalo and game, they were the tallest human beings alive on Earth at the time. And they were far high. I mean, the Europeans in America were like, I don't know, something like 5'3", 5'5", something like that, adult male height. These guys were 5'10" on average, right? So now in America, the average of adult male height is 5'8", so still not as tall. Some places in Europe, like Netherlands, things like that, might be a little higher. Scandinavia a little higher, but not much. And they're about that same height, and it depends on the source you're looking at too. But here's the interesting thing: is that in that study, they said specifically that these are from records that they took at the time. And the records at the time said the older generations of Cheyenne and Native Americans were far taller than the younger generations, because this was after the bison got killed and they got taken off their lands and put in the reservations. And so they couldn't actually get their natural diet. So we saw that exact transition and inflection point that we see in the fossil record with agriculture. They were extremely tall, and then bam, much shorter in 1 or 2 generations down. And then one generation down, the next generation further down. And so they said if they did this study 100 years earlier and got just the older generations, and before they got put on the reservations and the bison got wiped out, that the average height would have been far, far taller and far, likely far above 6 foot. We have different records in the fossil record looking at the mammoth hunters, and some of these populations were on average 6'2", 6'4", average, right? And there are plenty of records of the Native Americans just being towering tall, like Thomas Jefferson, the second president, one of the founding fathers. No, sorry, third president. He when he was president, there was a meeting. They had these people, I think they're coming from like the Great Lakes area, and they wanted to meet the Great White Father, the chief of the American tribe, and so they came over to meet him. Thomas Jefferson was pretty tall. I think he was like 6'1", 6'2". So for the time, he was a big guy because he was wealthy and he could eat meat. He could afford meat. Same with George Washington. He was like 6'2", 6'3", something like that. And these guys came in, and his record said that he said that these guys were just giants. So they were just towering over them. Estimates are they were probably around 6'10". They're pushing 7 feet tall, right? These big dudes, and there's paintings of these guys. And I say there's like, oh, look how small their heads are. These primitive savages. Their heads are so small. They're just not as good as, they don't have these big brains like these Europeans do. And then you actually look at the scale, and you realize that these guys are all like 6'10", 7 foot tall. And you realize they have massive, like basketball sized heads. It's just because they're so tall, the proportion looks different. Huge brains, huge bodies, much bigger. That's how humans are supposed to be. We're all shrunk. We're all post-agricultural midgets compared to what we're supposed to be genetically. And so, hopefully it can take multiple generations to actually breed back to what you're supposed to be, like your height and health and things like that. We saw this with cats, with Pottinger's cats, who's actually a partner with Weston A. Price. They made the Price Pottinger Association. So Dr. Pottinger has a study called Pottinger's Cats, and they started giving them raw meat instead of or raw meat or cooked meat, and they found that the raw meat cats were far healthier, and there are nutrients that you lose when you cook meat that cats require, that they're essential, like taurine. And so the raw meat cats were much healthier. Every generation, super healthy, everything's great. Behavior, sexual, sort of reproductive sort of health, all that stuff is very good. Then the cooked meat cats were not as healthy. They didn't survive like certain surgeries and procedures that they were originally studying. And so then they started, okay, well, the next generation was actually smaller, had lower bone mineral density, smaller brains, less developed facial structures and features like the zygomatic arch, which is the cheekbones. And then and they were sickly. The next generation were even worse. They were even smaller, had even less bone mineral density. It was like 3% bone mineral density at that point, down from like went from 14.7 to 3. So it was like big drops every generation. And they couldn't reproduce. They were getting like multiple fractures. They said the bones were the texture of foam rubber, and so they're very soft bones. And so some of these poor little kittens were getting like 30, 40 fractures throughout their body. And it was horrible, horrible stuff because they were so unhealthy, just because they were cooking the meat, not even giving them, grain and kibble, that bullshit that we feed them now, which they supplement with taurine. But they were getting sicker and sicker and sicker until, the third generation, they couldn't reproduce, right? Until they started feeding them raw meat again, and they got healthy again, and they improved. They didn't grow to the full size of a cat, but because they were already there. So we're full grown, we fully developed, so we're screwed, but we can at least optimize our health now and help our kids. And that was the thing that Pottinger found, was that third generation, once they started feeding them meat, they started getting healthy again, and they started being able to reproduce. And so were able to have another generation of cats. But those cats were not just back to normal. It took 4 generations until they bred back to the same height, same size, same health, same development of facial structures, and same brain size, right? 4 generations, right? So there's this multi-generational epigenetic knock-on effect from eating crap. So what you eat now does not only affect you and your kids, it affects your grandkids and your great grandkids. That's a huge responsibility, and something I think people need to really take uh, you know take seriously. But the idea that there's just no evidence or no long-term evidence is just the most laughably ridiculous statement I've ever heard.
Yeah. I mean, when you're a carnivore, you don't need any supplements, but when you're a vegan, you
Yeah.
have to take so many different. And where
Hmm.
was the supplements, I don't know, 100 years ago or 200 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it,
It's
it
really not
should
during the ice
say,
ages.
yeah,
Yeah.
it should
Yeah.
say, uh, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
This,
Well, that's it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
this,
If
this
you
type.
if you have to supplement, then by definition, your diet is deficient. And how can our natural evolved diet be deficient in nutrients? That doesn't make any sense. That cannot be. It just cannot be. And so you don't need a study for that. It doesn't make any damn sense. And so, it doesn't matter what a study says if it doesn't line up with reality. You have a survey study that says X, but you have experimental data that shows the opposite. As Richard Feynman said, it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And I would add in, if it doesn't agree with reality, it's wrong. If the observed reality that you can see in front of you says no, then it's wrong. Einstein did this. Einstein, the people that have followed him thought, oh, we should be able to find an equation of everything, explain the universe and explain everything. And they thought you could just prove something mathematically. If you proved it mathematically, well, then there's proof. That's it. Well, no, because you may not have all the variables. And so working with the variables that you have, you're only going to get so far. You can say, oh, I've proven this. But then you observe what's going on in the universe and it's not actually lining up. Einstein would just throw it away. If he said he proves something mathematically, this is what, if this theory is true, we should see this. And then the technology came, they were able to observe that, and they're like, no, it's not it. He's like, okay, well, that's wrong. And he threw it out, right? Tried something else. Now they're just using fudge factors and say, well, I've proven it mathematically. This is a whole other rabbit hole, but there's a book called The Big Bang Never Happened. And it goes hard into the evidence of this. There's a whole field of physics called plasma physics that shows a very, very different story. And people say, well, we know the Big Bang happened because we've proven it mathematically, but it doesn't actually line up with the observed facts and all these different things. Well, if it did happen, we should see this microwave rate background. And yeah, there's a microwave background, but it's 10,000 times too small, smaller than it would need to be if their theory was true. Okay. And so, well, if all this matter, happened from the Big Bang, this, that, and the other, and form the galaxies and structures and all these sorts of things, we would need X amount of mass in the universe. And in fact, there's only about 3% of that. And it's like, oh, okay. So now there's dark matter and black holes. And by definition, these are things that you cannot observe, you cannot measure. We just know they're there because we know the Big Bang happened because we proved it mathematically. And for that to exist, it would have to have that. That's called a fudge factor. Your theory's wrong. It sucks. Throw it out. That's what Einstein did. But then they said, okay, well, actually, that's not good enough. Well, now there's dark energy. There's this mysterious energy force that you can't measure, you can't reproduce, you can't actually show that it exists. But we know it exists because it has to exist. And you have this other, and so all this 76% of the universe must be made up of dark energy and dark matter. So it's like, oh, fuck's sake. Can you just admit that you're wrong and just move on with your life? That's the same thing with the vegans and I mean like you were vegan for a long time, but you weren't doing it for any nefarious reasons. You were trying to be healthy. You were trying to do the right thing, and by yourself, by your own health, for the environment, for animal, for all these different reasons. You're all very good altruistic reasons, but it's just not correct. And so I don't have a problem with people trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to do the right thing. It's just we've come to very different conclusions. And so it's the people that are pushing this narrative, for their own betterment, the people that profit from this. I mean, people like Simon Hill, he's got multiple multi-million dollar houses. I mean, this guy is making a lot of money on this vegan scam. I don't, he's not even vegan himself. He talks about how he eats eggs and things like that, and say, oh, you can be strong like me if you're a vegan. Like, buddy, you're not a damn vegan. You're a con artist, and he's making a lot of money. He's making millions of dollars pushing this stuff. And so that's the problem I have with people, that they make these really, really lame duck arguments. Um, and and they try to make fudge factors, like trying to explain away why we're actually herbivores and veganism is the best way when you can't even get basic nutrition. And they say, oh, that doesn't matter because you can have supplements. No, you're missing the salient point, which is like that's not what we're designed to eat. And they try to say, well, yeah, we're designed to eat meat. We've been eating meat for a long time, but it's worse now. Thank goodness we have science to tell us with a survey that plants are so much better. Like it doesn't make any sense. And people that are that are thinking clearly and don't have any sort of ulterior motives to push a certain agenda see this very clearly. And this is why 84% of vegans don't stay vegan. And this is why the majority of people are coming away from this and starting to eat meat again, and finding that they are better for this. And we're having this movement where more and more people are eating meat because it works, and because people feel better, and because their health improves in such dramatic ways. And you can have vegans that they cut out junk food and all that sort of stuff, but eventually they still get sick. They still get even more sick for the vast majority of people. Yeah, there's some people that do this stuff long term. They're heavily supplementing, and if you have to do that, that you're not doing something naturally or as healthy as for you, because if it's not about just doing it naturally, it's not healthy. That's not a healthy diet. If you have to take supplements to supplement your diet is deficient, and it is a bad diet. It is an unhealthy diet. So, like Brian Johnson, you know, he's spending $2 million, $3 million a year. Originally, I remember I saw him say that he did a vegan diet, or largely plant-based, but it wasn't because he thought
I lost you.
that was just what he chose, you know, and that's what he chose. And then he's just told his doctor to figure it out. He takes like 160 supplements a day, 150, 160 pills a day. Just eat a steak, man. Like that's all you got to do. And now he's trying to say that no, 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 that's the best thing. All these calories have to fight for their lives and all that sort of stuff. And it's just like, dude, this is ridiculous. Like if this was a healthy diet, you wouldn't need 160 supplements a day. Like I'm sorry. Like I mean, we are not pillivores, we're not supplementivores. Like that's not what we're designed to eat. And it's just insane that people are trying to explain this away and say that the healthiest diet is one that is by definition unhealthy because we know it doesn't contain all the nutrients. And then we just fill in the gaps with a bunch of supplements that are man-made. And that's very elitist too. I mean, it's nice for Brian Johnson to be able to spend $2 million a year to have a healthy vegan diet, but like no one else can do that, and like just people in America or in Europe, they can't afford all these supplements. And that's not even getting into, people in India and Africa and third world countries that have no access to these things. India, and people say, well, what about India? If we're supposed to eat meat, these India, they're all vegetarians, they're all super healthy. No, they're some of the sickest people on earth. We've been seeing a lot of stuff about how, red dye 40 and stuff like that is in America, and Americans are the sickest people in the world. We are not. We're very sick. But we are not the sickest people in the world. People in Europe and Canada and Australia and other Western countries are nearly as sick as we are, if not sicker in some areas. And people in India are arguably more sick because the diabetes rates, the type 2 diabetes rates in America is only 9%, which is huge. It takes about 75% of our Medicare and Medicaid costs, expenditures are on type 2 diabetes, with only 9% of the population. In India, there's a study published, I believe, in the Lancet in 2018, showing that 25% of people in both urban and rural areas had type 2 diabetes, right? 25%. That's 3 times higher. They don't have red dye 40. That's not what's doing this. It's a vegan, vegetarian, plant-based diet. That's what's doing it. They are getting extremely sick. And they're some of the shortest people in the world with some of the lowest life expectancy in the world. It's like 66 or something like that. They are not healthy. I mean, what about, we talk about the blue zone? Oh, look at them. They eat all these plants. Well, what about the anti-blue zones like India? You have 1.4 billion people, largely vegetarian. The average person in India only eats 3 kilos of meat per year, right? And they're dying in their 60s, and 25% of them have diabetes. 1 in 4 people in India will die of a heart attack. 1 in 3 men will die of a heart attack. How are we saying that that's a healthy diet? How are we saying that that's good? And they are rife with nutritional deficiencies because they cannot afford all these supplements and things like that the vegans think are just our natural diet. If you have to supplement, then by definition, your diet is deficient and a bad diet. It cannot be called a good diet or a healthy diet if you have to take supplements by definition, because that diet is bad. So you have to add something to it to make it less bad. And that doesn't even get into the whole anti-nutrients and toxins. I mean, anti-nutrients are huge too because they block out the nutrients, absorption of different vitamins and minerals that we have. That's huge. If you have someone that eating oysters, there's a study had 3 groups, and I'll finish with this. The oysters have highest concentration of zinc in anywhere in the food supply. So second is beef, but it's actually far down. So oysters have a ton of zinc. Gave a group just oysters, and another group oysters with black beans, same amount of oysters, and another group same amount of oysters with corn tortillas. And the group with just oysters, they check their blood levels of zinc a couple hours afterwards, boom, shoots up, right? As you would expect. But then with the black beans, and they're saying, oh, it's a more diverse diet, and oh, you want all these colors on your plate and all these different sorts of things because you get all these different nutrients, It's like, well, no, I mean, color doesn't mean nutrient, like what who's yellow deficient? I was like, oh, I need some more purple today. I'm feeling purple deficient. I mean, a lot of things can make purple or yellow. It's nonsense saying that we just need different colors of things. And then so suppose it should be more diverse, more nutrients, all that sort of stuff with the black beans, right? Wrong. Because when they had the oysters with the black beans, they only had 25% of the rise in zinc that the other group had. So the black beans blocked out 75% of the nutritional absorption. If you're blocking out one nutrient, zinc, you're blocking out others as well. And then the other group with the corn tortillas, that actually blocked out 100% of the zinc. They had absolutely no elevation in their zinc whatsoever. So, that's a major issue. And I see this in my patients all the time. Even people that are carnivore, but they still drink coffee. They have coffee in the morning with their medications. Like, some people I've had on thyroid medication, for instance, people that have hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, these sorts of things. Um, so I have these patients, and they all of a sudden they come in and they're checking their labs every so often, every few months, and their T3 levels are like down where they were before they started. And I was like, okay, did you stop taking your medications? I say, no, still taking them. And it was just like, turns out they're having coffee either with them or within a half an hour. You're not supposed to have anything within a half an hour of taking your thyroid medication. So they're having like coffee with breakfast or something like that. I found that we had to delay it by 2 hours after they took their thyroid hormone to actually get proper absorption. And so when they just delayed it for 2 hours, took their thyroid medication, and then didn't have coffee for 2 hours, I'll check their thyroid function a couple weeks later, boom, shoots up, right? Could even double or more. I had one lady went from very low to like way below the reference range, even for, and the reference range are just averages for people. So if you're below the lab average reference range, you're really low. So she was really low and below that lab average reference range. And and she just stopped coffee. She said, screw it, I'm just not going to drink coffee if that's what it's doing to me. She came back and it had tripled. Now she was above the actual optimal reference range that I would have her at, well above the lab reference range, right? And so now we had to like reduce her thyroid medication because she just didn't need it, just because she stopped taking she stopped drinking coffee. So the anti-nutrients are a major factor here. I mean, before we even talk about toxins, so yeah, I mean, this is just at every angle you look at it, the plants are not a good idea for us to eat. They don't want us to eat them. They have many robust ways of defending themselves. We have categorized, classified, and named nearly 1 million different plant defense chemicals that are either going to cause direct damage, direct harm, hormonal disruption, cause us to be light sensitive. It can be anti-nutrients and block out the absorption of different things, tannins, lectins, phytates, oxalates, all these saponins, blocking off our digestive enzymes to stop us from breaking down even bioavailable foods like meat. Their nutrients in plants aren't even bioavailable. They're bound up with chemical bonds that we don't have the enzymes to break, which tells you for a cold frozen fact that we are not biologically designed to eat these because we do not have the enzymes to extract the nutrients. And so we have to cook them, we have to ferment them, we have to mix them with lye and other sort of caustic materials to try to break down these structures, these toxins, and these bonds to release the nutrients, because we don't have the natural capacity biologically to do that, which tells you in no uncertain terms, for a verifiable fact, that we are not biologically designed to eat these things, and we cannot gain proper nutrition from them without copious amounts of technology and intervention, which means that biologically it's not for us.
Yeah, and in the book there can be written that these plants and fruits have lots of vitamins and minerals, but it's just in the book. If it's not bioavailable, if you can only
That's it.
get 5% from it, but meat is fully bioavailable with all the nutrition that the body needs. So yeah.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Anthony, you have to come back. I have so many topics I wanted to cover, yeah, about health and stuff. I hope you
Yeah,
have another time too to have a chat.
yeah, that'd be good. Happy to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, bye. And now I have
Bye.
to find where I stop this.
It's yeah, it should be up in the top somewhere.
Last, I found